we are excited to bring this series of informational chats to help through the challenging times we are all experiencing. I'm Mary Jo Mahood. I'm the practice manager here at E2B Technologies, and I'll be your host for today. I am also joined by Frank Niesenbaum, Vice President of Sales at C2B Technologies. Frank will be helping us understand some of the things we can do to help our businesses navigate through these uncertain times and come out the other side stronger than ever. I sure hope everyone enjoys the warmth of the fireplace behind us. We thought it would be a nice touch as we're working through everything. So these are definitely some tough and challenging times for all of us, but I am very confident that our national spirit and cooperation is going to help get us through all that. And in today's fireside chat, we're going to discuss several topics that are impacting businesses such as yourselves today. We're going to talk about things, troubles that you're having managing a disrupted supply chain. How about the people part of the business? We'll take a look at that. And then we're going to discuss how should you be analyzing data in today's world. And then we'll talk a little bit about some of the tax effects that are happening now during the pandemic and those that you will be challenged with for after the pandemic. And each one of these topics that we're going to touch on today are going to be discussed in greater detail throughout our series of fireside chats this month. So before we begin speaking with Frank, I just want to start with a couple poll questions. The first one that I'd like everybody to take a second and answer for me is, did you or do you currently have a contingency plan in place to manage a crisis like we're experiencing today? So let's go ahead and just take a few seconds here to allow you to answer before we move on to the second one. Okay, it looks like we've had a chance for everybody to respond, so thank you very much for that. The second question that I wanted to pose to the audience today was, which category of operations do you fit in? A lot of the states are a shelter in place right now, so are you an essential business where it's business as usual for you? Or are you open for business, but most of your employees are remote, or you're operating on a skeleton crew, limited capacity? Or are you one of the businesses who has to close indefinitely until this is over? Or maybe you happen to be a startup and you're not currently operating, but you're working towards trying to open in the middle of this pandemic? Or do you happen to be one of our medical or healthcare providers today? So if you could just take a few minutes to respond to that poll for me, that would be awesome. Okay, well, it looks like everybody's had a chance to reply to that. Thank you so much. That's going to be very helpful as we go through our conversation today. So before we begin, Frank, I just want to thank you so much for giving us some of your time today to spend with us. One of the first questions that I have for you is, what are the general tips you have for everybody in this difficult time?
Well, thanks, Mary Jo, and I'm really happy to have the time and glad to join you. I know that for those of us in our organization, this is a critical time, and we're happy to share some of the things we know and we've learned. The questions were really interesting. It did look like about half the group or so had some type of plan in place, which is awesome. The rest, maybe in different stages of that. And I did notice that most of the people that are attending are either essential service or are open for business, similar to the way we are. We're both, but also working remotely. what I tell you is that, we talk about some of the tips in general terms. The first thing I would say is that you really need to adjust your strategy. So if you don't have an emergency plan in place, which we saw some do, some don't, you need to make that a priority, right? Do it now, today, and we mean it. So as soon as you are done listening to this webinar, be a good time to start thinking about it. There's a good chance somewhere in the life of your business, you're going to encounter an emergency. It may not be a pandemic like we're experiencing now, but you are going to experience an emergency. And a good plan is going to help you prevent panic and major turmoil in your life, but actually, even more importantly, or as important, the lives of your employees. The other thing I would tell you, and it's something we talk a lot about in our organization, is communication. So communicate changes to the people you work with. A couple of things you might look at is, communicating effectively and efficiently is really important with your customers, your vendors, and your employees. Those relationships are invaluable. I would look to build trust with those current and potential customers, vendors, and your employees through extensive proactive communication. Think about emails, right? A lot of people are working remotely, so if you don't get them on the phone calls are great also, but email follow-ups are really important. And then I tell you to update your website. Keep information on your website. Let people know if you're an essential business or you're open for business or whatever may be going on with you. And if events have to be postponed or locations are going to be closed, it's important that a refund or a reschedule or something of some kind of relief. It's going to be a relief point for those who may experience stress or hardship during these times. It is tough. One of the things I saw, for example, is Google recommends that you update your business hours and your description and so on in your Google profile, your My Business profile. I know that locally here, when we're looking for restaurants or grocery stores or businesses that can help us, we sometimes Google and look at what the site shows in terms of their new hours or their extended hours or hours for senior citizens, things like that. I think that's important. And ultimately, Mary Jo, keep checking in. That's the best thing I can tell you.
No, you're absolutely right, Frank. You've got to stay in touch while we're doing the social distancing. That's some great advice. Why don't we start to talk a little bit about supply chain and what can we do to ensure that our inventory is ready for any type of emergency like this or an unforeseen event like a hurricane? There's got to be something that we can do to help manage a disrupted supply chain.
Yeah, that's a great conversation. Obviously, a lot of people on might be a manufacturer, distributor, whatever that might be, and that type of information is important. Not too long ago, we held a webinar. We talked about inventory optimization. It's out there if people are looking for that type of information in detail, and you can always, revisit that webinar. But along those lines, I would tell you that it's important to have really current and real data about your inventory at any time, but especially in these times. Some of the tips that I can pass along, starting with number one, alignment and accountability. We talked about this in that webinar, but we need to make sure that everyone in the organization is on the same page and they know what they're responsible for. Finance, purchasing, sales, all need to be aligned with what you're going to do to handle inventory and make sure that everybody knows what they're accountable for. And then we're going to talk about this a lot today as well, but data. Any way we can replace manual processes, make sure that your ERP or your ancillary systems all can drive the policies that you're going to put together to gather that data and then store them in an accessible place like the cloud. And we'll talk about that a little more later, but definitely the cloud. And then it's imperative to have a strong inventory tracking system, something to provide the data that you need to review vendor performance, inventory movement, shipping, receiving, what's going on the shop floor or in the warehouse. And this is all going to help everybody make the right investments and prevent inventory shortages or bottlenecks, things that are going to occur in the warehouse or in manufacturing. Those are some of the tips I'd pass along.
Great, Frank. That's awesome. Now, my question to you, though, is I've been reading a lot while this pandemic's been going on, and one of the things I came across was the supply chain 4.0. And I did a lot of reading on that. Is that something that businesses should look to implement now? And how does it actually help the disrupted supply chain?
That's a great question too, Mary Jo. Also, I'm sure everybody on here has been seeing it out there in the market or in the world, in the industries, supply chain 4.0. You know, what is that? That's the application of Internet of Things, the use of advanced robotics, artificial intelligence, all the things that the world is moving to. And it may be something, you know, from an analytics or a big data supply chain management standpoint, that if we're not doing it now, we need to think about it. You know, and how does it help us in these tough times? I'd carry it forward and tell you that, you know, it may be difficult to implement that technology during this crisis, but it is a good idea to think about it and start planning. The more automation that you can add to your organization will be better for you during this crisis, but it also will be in the future. I mean, if you think about Industry 4.0 and where the world's going and the disruption it's creating, it requires all of us to rethink the way that we design our supply chain. Several of the technologies that have emerged are altering all the traditional ways of working. Look at us all now. A lot of us are working from home, but our businesses are still moving and we're still doing things we need to do. And then besides that, the need to adapt, these supply chains also right now have the opportunity to reach the next horizon of operational effectiveness. You know, you need to be able to leverage all the emerging digital supply chain business models and things that are out there. And there's a lot of information for people to see, and that'll help transform the company to a digital supply chain. Again, may not be everything, but you can start that process now.
No, that's great, Frank. So I would guess things like bringing in even scanners into your warehouse would help you kind of not have to touch everything as much, or even help you with if you have to change your delivery methods. I think you might get it to be a little bit faster, maybe, it sounds like.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, great. Well, now about that, so we talked about the disruption, and we've talked about the supply chain 4.0, but how is that going to affect people? I mean, people are scared nowadays, and how should businesses work to work with their people and help manage them through this crisis?
Yeah. And people are worried, right? Everybody's thinking about it. It's on everybody's mind. And outside of our resources around inventory or products or services, all those things, our people are the most important things to us. I know that in our organization, that's been the mantra since the beginning of this whole crisis, is that the people are the most important thing. It's interesting, you know, what people can do, excuse me, to make that better. But I would tell you that, you know, it's important, if you can, to make, you know, to give people the permission or grant them permission to work from home. I know that we've done that in most cases in our organization. And what we've done to make that even better is that we're able to, you know, share via Teams and have a daily meeting where we all get together. And if nothing else, stay together, touch base, everybody updated on what's there. And actually, because of the video, see a smiling face, or at least some face to talk about things going on. And then again, you have to bear in mind, you know, if there are shelter in place or stay at home situations in different areas, different states, you know, there are typically exemptions for businesses that are grocery stores or pharmacies or essential businesses, but a lot of people are being given that option. It's something to consider. And all I would stress is that it's important to research the applicable laws and directives from your state and locality. I mean, the federal government's putting things out, but every state and every locality does things a little differently. And it's important to, you know, to give people that option. You know, the interesting follow-up to that is, you know, what do we tell our employees about COVID-19? I don't even like saying the words, but, you know, it has a name. I think some of the things that I can pass along that I think, you know, and we'll have a webinar later this month to talk about people even more, but is to look at appointing a couple of key members inside the organization to monitor the communications. There's a lot of information on the industry sites, public sites, government sites, all the different areas that information can be picked up and validated. And then instead of everybody trying to grab the information and share it, really see if a couple people have that role and can take care of that. And then, I mean, this is a no-brainer, but it's important to sanitize, right? Sanitation and sharing best practices across the organization. You know, what we're touching, who we're seeing, what we're doing. I think that is invaluable. You mentioned it a little bit before, but in terms of how we get product, right? Keeping people less in human contact where they can be, looking at ways to pre-order things, have curbside delivery or curbside pickup, delivery. I know that's not practical in every one of our organizations, but there are ways to make things available and make it easier for people to get to them without extensive human contact. And then the other part of it is, other things to look at, sick leave and PTO, right? Everybody's got some kind of policy. There's things in their system that they can do. I think it's important for people to publicize that in the organization. Communicate. Let people know what the policies are and what the government's doing to change some of those policies and or even around unemployment, that type of thing. This is simple, but if you don't already do it, offer direct deposit. Maybe there are other ways you can find to put money in people's hands other than just handing them a paycheck. You can do a direct deposit. There are other ways to transfer money. Again, making minimal contact makes it a lot easier for people. And then the last thing I'd talk about would be around, what goes on with hiring freezes and layoffs and things like that. We all know we're going to come out of this. I believe that. I know we all do. So in the event that you're going to be hiring again, or maybe there's a temporary freeze on hiring, things like that, communicate with candidates, hold virtual pre-screenings and process. Similar with your employees, you can do all these things via Zoom or other products that are out there to keep people informed of what's going on, keep your website updated. I think there's a lot of ways to do it, but you really got to take care of your people and think about it and communicate. Makes them feel a lot better. I know I do.
No, you're right. Communication is key to everything that we do, regardless of whether we're working remote or when we were all in the office. What about, so we've talked about the people, but how about the taxes that are going to come out during and post-pandemic? What are some of those tax effects of that CARE Act and others that we need to be worried about?
Right. It's a great question. And you and I both coming from the accounting world once upon a time, a long time ago. Well, not that long ago, I know. When we did, right, we know that the accounting profession are people we can rely on. They're not being practicing CPAs or in that business. That's not what we're here for. But what I would tell you is, with the new CARE Acts that are out there, there have been a number of released laws passed or relief packages passed. There are going to be more to come. I would tell you your CPA firm is your number one contact. These, the people that we're in contact with in the industry, they are working hard to understand every page of those documents and understand the effects for their clients. They're the people that you want to talk to. If they're not available, or if you don't have a direct connect to a CPA firm, I can tell you that your law firm, other people in the industry. But I would also tell you that I've noticed that most of the CPA firms are holding webinars. They fill up quickly, but there are opportunities to get out there and find information. That's going to become even more prevalent over the next few days or next few weeks or so. But be careful. A couple tips I can tell you: watch out for scams. There are people out there saying they're the IRS. There are people out there saying they're this or that. You just really need to be careful who you provide information to, make sure it's a legitimate source. I know that the FASB board is proposing some deadline or some delays to help people. There are tax deadlines that have all been changed, not just federally, but around the country. Look into what's going on corporately, because a lot of what gets publicized is only individuals. And then the SBA capabilities. There's a lot of things in these new packages that are going to help people keep their businesses running and keep the employees working. So I suggest you visit the state sites for unemployment information, but also workers' compensation, which is being affected by this, and other relief that might be available. And again, lastly, just keep looking and attending webinars that are hosted by local CPAs in the government. Best thing you can do. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Sure. No, I was just going to ask, Frank, so that's some great advice from what businesses are going to see, but what about when they're in businesses? Anything changing for the way in which they are reaching their consumers, that we need to worry about there?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things I saw, that a lot of the world shying away from crowds, obviously, with what's going on with the shelter in place or other things that state and local governments are putting out there. I did see a survey in February from CoreSite Research. It showed about 28% of the U.S. internet users were avoiding public places. Not shocking, but it also, even more interesting, indicated that 58% would do so if the coronavirus outbreak worsens in the U.S. And that's not surprising. But what's also not surprising is that the people over 60 have said that they were likely to avoid those crowded places given that this is going on, and it hits older people or the senior population hardest. It may have an unintended consequences on their shopping habits. That's something to think about. A lot of the older individuals or the senior crowd, as we like to say, they're the ones who it's hitting the hardest, and they may especially be likely to alter their behavior. So what I would tell you, it means more adoption of e-commerce, right, in the industries and in the world. An area that maybe they've been a little slower to adapt or other people have, but it's something that's coming. So I would tell you along the lines of what you're asking, Mary Jo, companies need e-commerce sites to be prepared, not just for the additional traffic, but also understanding the sales tax laws and things like that come into play, which is a big part of what we've been talking about in terms of taxes. So there's a lot of new tax requirements that come around the internet, e-commerce, things like that. People need to be aware. And we are going to have a webinar strictly focused around sales tax and that later this month. And I encourage everyone to attend that's doing business that way.
Absolutely. I think that's going to be one of the best sessions that we have to make sure everybody understands the sales tax ramifications as everybody moves more to e-commerce.
Yeah.
So throughout today, we've talked a lot about data, but what we haven't really talked about is how that data can affect or help us in these times, and how we should change or adapt to what we're dealing with data.
Yeah. And that's a great point. I mentioned data before, but obviously having the right data that's current and available anywhere, anytime will help you make quicker decisions. And then you're doing it based on the trends that are occurring in your businesses. I know that we're all used to looking at trends probably, in the past, mostly on an annual basis, and then it really moved to a monthly basis. But you know what? Now it's even more important to look at them weekly and frankly, daily, as things are changing that rapidly in your business, especially in a pandemic time. That's something we need to think about.
That's great, but what about, how am I going to get that data that quickly? I mean, I know in the past people have done spreadsheets, so they're cranking away at these spreadsheets, and that takes a lot of time. How am I supposed to look at my data daily? Yeah. Is there any technology to help me?
And I'm not an Excel basher, okay? We all need Excel. We all have grown up on it. We use it extensively in our business every day. But what I would tell you is that most of the ERP systems or accounting systems or other ancillary systems out there, like Sage Intacct, which is one of the products that we represent, for example, they have extensive dashboards, KPIs, queries, all of them available out of the box and configurable. And a lot of the systems have gone that way, and they're updatable, they're live, they're pulling data from all the different places that are into your total solution across the enterprise. And maybe products it's pulling data from that are outside the system. You can track inventory, sales, warehouses, products, people, just about anything you need to be able to be proactive to events that are going to occur in your business rather than reactive, which in today's world, being reactive is devastating. So having something in place like that, these systems are going to make that much easier. And that data is always out there at this point.
Great. Well, now I just heard you mention Sage Intacct. And I recall that being a cloud-based solution, if I'm not mistaken, but people have been so afraid to move to the cloud. Is now a good time to move to the cloud? Should we have already been in the cloud? Would it have helped us if we were with what we're dealing with today?
I'm going to say absolutely, which, popular or unpopular, I'd tell you absolutely. I think now more than ever, the cloud makes sense. Most ERPs and accounting solutions, again, like Sage Intacct, offer cloud solutions for their deployment. Even if the solution, though, what I want to encourage people is even if the solution is premise-based, there are many options for hosting that solution to provide much of the same benefit as a true software as a service solution. So many people are working from home, like we are, or other areas of the world. But even when this is over, we have a dispersed population, right? It's a world economy, or you're remote. The cloud gives you access that is no different than you being in the office. Obviously, there are some functions that have to be handled in a factory or a warehouse But the system and infrastructure are not required to be there. That's the key. And it's a cost savings. There's a cost savings there for organizations who have the extensive hardware costs or infrastructure or upkeep and that type of thing. And you may be paying an outsource firm to do it. So it's a lot less than a cloud platform. You know, Mary Jo, I think we're going to see a lot more of this and more as we live in this current and post-pandemic world. We've already seen it. We've seen a dramatic increase, you and I, in our company, in the number of our opportunities that either are moving to the cloud from our existing clients or clients that are coming to us today and say they only want to look at cloud solutions. It's safe, it's reliable, it's been tested. You know, this isn't the old days where we worried about the cloud or the security. It's really strong, and all these opportunities are moving in that direction. That's the best I can tell you.
No, great, Frank. Thank you so much. And it looks like we're coming up on the 2 o'clock hour. So, Frank, I want to thank you so much for sitting down with me today and sharing some of your insight. I know we covered several topics. Thanks, Frank. I know we covered several topics, everyone, but we hope this information is helpful to you. And we hope that you'll join us at one or all of these exciting webinars to come where we'll dive in deeper into each one of these topics. So our next one coming up on April 7th is where we're going to dive in deeper with some of our experts talking to us about how you manage a disruptive supply chain. I won't read you every one of these on the list, but please take some time to review those and feel free to join us in the coming months as we try and manage through this pandemic together. I want to thank everybody for attending today, and I want you all to stay safe out there. Thanks so much.
Yeah, stay safe, everybody. Stay strong. We will survive. Thanks, Mary Jo.
Thanks, Frank.